Larry Brocke is the Alberta Road Builders and Heavy Construction Association's newest honorary lifetime member. Larry's career was inspired by a quote from Mark Twain.
We have to look after our land because they're not making any more of it. All of a sudden one day I remembered that, put my education to work. When you look back at that, it was a long way of saying reclamation.
In my view, Larry was a pioneer. He was one of the first practitioners. Some of the work he was doing for me in 1977, soil surveys, those were the beginnings of having real information on the ground.
He was out in the field and understood people. The phrase boots on the ground, I think, describes Larry. I probably had as many meetings with Larry in the field at a mine site as I did in a government office or a corporate office. He wanted to see what was going on.
You have to see it and touch it and know what it is before you can start talking about it.
Larry would talk about landscape and talk about soils and vegetation, kind of three factors. Get those things right and you're on your way to making lands productive, capable, and useful.
Larry was the former director of land reclamation for Alberta Environment, and he also chaired the Development and Reclamation Review Committee, formulated with all the regulators in the province of Alberta. So a company developing a coal mine or an oil sands project or a pipeline or a transmission line, the major projects, could come to the table and present their project to all the regulators in one room.
The Development and Reclamation Review Committee was a cross-ministry, so across governments, like a dozen departments or more, agencies with different mandates, the industry sector.
Each having their own vision of what needs to be protected or what's important to the environment. And Larry would look at it in terms of the bigger picture. And to come out of such a wide, diverse group with a proper solution everybody could live with was an amazing skill.
There was a side of him being an educator as well. Many meetings would involve helping people understand, both government people understand what was going on and the limitations perhaps of a field and the equipment you were using, and also perhaps a mine manager understand why something needed to be done from an environmental standpoint. When he first came in, there was what I will call a 3-meter dilemma, and we were going from operations saving perhaps 3 inches of soil, and now the government was asking for 3 meters. So the industry obviously pushed back on that. We looked into research, and Larry listened to that. In the end, amount of soil ended up being in 1.5 meters or so that was being used, but that was based on science and it was supported by research. Yeah, that was that pragmatic, science-based approach that Larry used that allowed for cost-effective reclamation to be done.
He also played a large role in the formulation of the Environmental Protection Enhancement Act. They seconded him into that role to combine all the previous legislation.
It all started out before I even started with oil and gas. That was the first legislation passed to deal with putting those back together, and then it progressed onto coal mining, oil sand mining, sand gravel pits, and finally road building.
Starting in about 1989, we worked on draft regulations, draft legislation. And again, we were talking to municipalities, we were talking to organizations, whether it's Sand and Gravel Association or the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and hearing what they might be concerned about. A lot of the bugs have been worked out before it came out because we tried out the processes in draft form. We asked lots of questions, listened a lot, and I think we were very successful that way.
One of the biggest things that Larry did was sort of focusing on the objective of reclamation in terms of equivalent land capability. It allowed for changes in the kinds of land uses, so there was flexibility to introduce things like end-pit lakes into coal mines.
In the case of a mine site in the mountains, and some of the high walls could be left and they would become terrain that would be used for sheep for escape.
You didn't have to return it to as it was before disturbance. There was flexibility.
Whatever it might have been forested, that was a mine. Maybe it's time now to make a lake and have a fishery. Okay, we can then say that's at least equivalent to what it was before. but now it's desired.
When the Environmental Protection Enhancement Act was introduced in '93, and Larry was heavily involved in that, that concept of equivalent land capability was put into the legislation. So that was a huge change in looking at the objective of reclamation.
So Larry sort of started out as a government guy that we liaised with fairly heavily on whatever the newest regulations were that our members had to be aware of and be implementing on their sites.
He had the utmost respect from the contractors because he actually knew what he was talking about.
You had to respect sort of his honesty and his integrity. You know, he could be pretty blunt, but the nice thing about that is he always knew where he stood.
He always had my back if there was a concern with a contractor, that he could come out, Larry or any of the staff, and work, you know, and make the contractor change his ways.
He'd be like, listen, you guys can't go around, you know, driving through creeks and messing stuff up anymore. Those days are over. You know, you're gonna get in trouble for it. It's gonna cost you a ton of money. You guys need to start caring about this right now.
Well, Larry was exactly the type of person that was needed to help bridge that gap between what the regulations were now requiring and how you would go about doing that.
The government reorganized, and he decided he wanted to come back out into industry. So we sat down for coffee one day and says, let's do something together. And that coffee turned into Millennium. Larry's knowledge and reputation in the industry brought work to the table. And for, I think, the first 5, 6, 7 years of the company, we never bid on anything.
Everybody knew Larry. They knew the level of the integrity and the quality of the work that he would perform.
After he left the government, we again contracted him on projects I was working with. He gave us tools to work our reclamation out with. And in particular, it was using soil surveys, giving us ways and means to inventory the landscape, to understand what the soils were like, to be able to quantify how much was there, and then how to rate the quality of the soils. That involves a lot of what I'd call translation. You're dealing with a wide range of people, and you've got to be able to speak their language. Larry would deal with a lot of regulations. How do you bring that into a practical sense that a mine manager, as an example, would understand? And Larry was excellent at that.
Larry, with the road builders, was instrumental in formulating the first environment committee. Second to that, another one is the Eco-Plan framework, which is, it started off with the Clover Bar Bridge construction project, and that was the first project that we were aware of that would required an environmental plan along with the construction plan.
It was a huge switch to how Alberta Transportation carried out their projects, and the City of Edmonton and the City of Calgary and a lot of other municipalities and heavy construction owners are using that same framework. So it was really groundbreaking. It brought environment into the culture of the heavy construction industry.
I look at the work that we do now with the road builders, and I would say we're the envy of Canada.
Larry had an unplanned medical event where he had a abscess go into his brainstem in January 2014, and it just about killed him. He spent, I don't know, over 100 days in intensive care. The progress that he's made in this short year and a half has just been incredible. And I attest that to his approach and his drive. But that's the type of person he is. He just will take something and he will go with it.
The guy's career just spans sort of every aspect of Alberta's environment, and you know, he had an enormous impact on us, but I know that that was just a really small piece of his career kind of as a whole.
All the individual projects over the years were all extremely important at their time. What was really driving me was getting a history book done. I think that's the most important.
He rolled into the road builder office probably 4 years ago now, and talked to Jean, our CEO, about wanting to do a history project of the history of land conservation and reclamation in Alberta.
We've done so many good things in Alberta with respect to the land and reclamation. Let's document it.
The purpose is to capture the first 50-some years of the new legislation, which started in 1963, and to provide information for the future practitioners. So if we're looking at students, whether they're in university or the technical colleges, they'll be able to go and say, well, this is how they did things, this is what's being done now.
He was the one truthfully leading the charge, getting all of the right people together, all of the retired environmental experts and folks like that, and making the right connections and the right calls. You know, Larry's a guy that he makes stuff happen.
Larry was a consensus builder, he was a problem solver, and somebody that really cared about protecting the environment.
Larry, on behalf of the road builders, thank you and congratulations.